Now, internationally, just the value of ecosystem services has been estimated to be $114 trillion a year. Nobody has been able to touch this at the moment, but everybody knows that it's there and it should be addressed. Now, I'd like to take you through what this means. Let's try and understand what it means. I mean, this is such a valuable thing. Then what does it mean? What are ecosystem services? If you look at what Wikipedia, Britannica, everybody says, is outputs, conditions, processes, or natural systems that enhance the ecosystem. Others says it's the output from healthy ecosystems. Now they give examples, but when we try to consider what are the ecosystem services, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is an ecosystem? Now, that's where we begin, because if you're using the word ecosystem and ecological services, we must understand what it means. Well, an ecosystem basically is where energy enters the system through photosynthesis and is incorporated into plant tissue. This is the first act, and this is what creates the ecosystem. Then, of course, here are the plants, and by feeding on the plants, there are the primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers, on and on and on. And this is an ecosystem, all right? And ecosystems have various functions. There are decomposers, who do nutrient cycling, the photosynthesizers, which do the creation, all of that. Now, when we look at an ecosystem, then we can ask ourselves, what is the primary act? That is, what is the first act of an ecosystem? Now, it is said that it would be impossible to overestimate the importance of photosynthesis in the maintenance of life on Earth. If photosynthesis ceases, so will all of us. So this is what basically is the primary or the first ecosystem service that is done on Earth. That is the capture of energy, that is the energy of sunlight, the capture of energy by the living system, which is a plant. And it uses chlorophyll to take carbon dioxide and water from the atmosphere to capture the sunlight and convert it into a sugar and oxygen. This process is what is called the primary, the first ecosystem service. This is the first step in life. Now, when we consider this, right, we understand that the action of primary productivity creates primary ecosystem services, and that supports all subsequent ecosystem services. Then what are these primary ecosystem services? It is the capture of solar energy through photosynthesis, the production of oxygen that leaves the plant, the photoremediation of groundwater, I'll talk about this a little, and the capture of carbon over time. Now, when we look at life and the whole ecosystem in itself is comprised of two portions. One portion does the production, and the other portion does the respiration. And that is, photosynthesis converts energy of the sun into organic substances that we can use. After they are made, biosynthesis begins. Biosynthesis takes the energy that has been gained from the sun through the primary metabolites, and then it's used to create all the cellulose, the lignins, alkaloids, everything else. This is the cascade of life. And understanding this is really important when we start to look at putting value on ecosystem services. Now, the current definitions of ecosystem services are subjective and hard to measure. I mean, look at what the UNEP has done. They've created all these things, primary, secondary, tertiary, and there are provisioning services, regulating services, support services, and each sort of group has a different definition of what cultural is. So it gets totally subjective. So putting a value on these things are difficult, whether it be pollination guides or whether it be the sensation of forest. This is difficult. So therefore, if we start to look and value ecosystem services, we have to begin by looking at something that is understandable, tangible, measurable, and is scientifically valid. Now, how do we get about this? Let's look at it again. As all ecosystem services begin with the leaves of plants or by its photosynthetic biomass, right? This is the process of the carbon cycle. So the energy, as we discussed before, enters the system through photosynthesis and is incorporated into plant tissue. And we can calculate this. We can calculate the primary ecosystem service through using leaf weight as the proxy. So if we understand how the primary formula works, we know that there is a ratio of 1 fixed carbon compound for 6 molecules of oxygen released. So when we look at the gain of weight of leaves, we can look at the total chlorophyll created in that whole area. Then we can start computing the amount of carbon created, the amount of oxygen released, and also the amount of water cleaned. We'll talk about this, and that is, these are ratios. The ratio 1 to 100 means for every molecule of carbon dioxide fixed, there's 100 molecules of water that are transmitted. And this then leaves the plant as transpiration. Here again, as I said, for every carbon compound fixed, there are 6 molecules of oxygen released. Now, as we look into this thing, we have various value variables to consider. That is, how long does a leaf exist on a plant? In temperate areas, 6 months or 8 months, and in winter it falls down. In tropical areas, it's there for a year or longer. What is the efficiency of that plant, etc. Now, these are the things we are working in calculating the primary ecosystem services. The question is, are these primary ecosystem services, can they be looked at as externalities, economic externalities when we practice agriculture? Now, what is an externality then? Externalities basically occur in an economy when the production or consumption of a specific good or service impacts a third party, which is not directly related to the production or consumption of that good or service. A negative externality is when consumer good causes a cost to the third party. Air travel causes an increase in pollution. Now, today, the entirety of our economic system works on the profit made by corporations by invoking negative externalities. All the costs of the pollution today, climate change, all of that has to be borne by us as negative externalities. Now, can we look at the other thing, which is the positive externality? This is when producing a good causes a benefit to a third party. And how should we look at that then? We know that growing trees now provide positive externalities. They occur to a third party at no benefit, that benefits at no direct cost. Now, if we consider trees and plants, there are many, many positive externalities that are totally ignored, and I'll take you through some. One, important positive externality is the function of trees, the cleaning groundwater through transpiration. This is because most groundwater is polluted to one degree or another, and however polluted the groundwater is, plants growing on that in the soil will take the moisture, take the water, put it through its trunk, and when it releases it from the leaves, it is pure water, transpired straight out. So trees and plants clean polluted groundwater, which enables us to drink. And this is a positive externality that is really not considered. If you look at the average transpiration rates, you see how much is given off a day. An acre of corn is about 3,000 to 4,000 gallons. A large oak tree, 40,000 gallons, per year. Now, this water from all these trees and plants around the world is added to the atmosphere to come down later as rainfall. Now, to come down as rainfall, there is another active, and that is the clouds cannot be made without the leaves of plants doing their primary productivity and releasing the water vapor. When it does that, from the leaves of plants comes the cloud condensation nuclei. This is, volatile organic compounds, biological particles, and around them condense the moisture without which rain cannot come down. So here's another positive externality that is not considered. Yet another positive externality is the value of evaporative cooling by the leaves of trees. One tree has been estimated to produce about 1,200,000 British thermal units a day of cooling. And leaves are the only production system on land that supplies oxygen. And the creation and destruction of molecular oxygen in the global commons were generally at near equilibrium, coming down slowly. But now local concentrations are changing radically. And globally, if you look, here's carbon dioxide building up year 2000, 2007, 2011, etc. And here's global oxygen in the atmosphere. It's coming down. And these are the engines that produce it. And we are removing it in huge quantities. Now, in terrestrial systems, primary ecosystem services occur within the photosynthetic biomass of the plants, making the weight of the leaves an ideal proxy for looking at the photosynthetic biomass. Then, primary ecosystem services produced by living leaves then provides a measure that is obvious, the leaf, and verifiable by simple testing, weighing it, which we have done around the world. Here's in Myanmar. We've gone to every year class, sample the leaves, weigh them, and we have a curve that tells us the growth rate of the photosynthetic biomass of each species. Now, we do this because the primary ecosystem services produced by living leaves is the act of primary productivity, which creates the primary ecosystem services. But under the current economy, in this photograph here, under the current economy, only the fruit has value. And that too, when it's plucked and sent to market. Under the proposed economy, the leaves too have value, but they have value as long as they are attached to the plant and living, because they are doing the job of primary productivity, photosynthesis. So this is the new economy we are suggesting, that under the proposed economy, these leaves too have value, but only as long as it is living. So how can we activate this? And to understand this also, I'd like to show you something else, and that is, if you look at the relative abundance of photosynthetic biomass on the planet, the biomass on the land is that much, and this is the biomass that's in the ocean, the photosynthetic biomass that produces all this stuff we're talking about. But if you look at the oxygen produced is this much from the ocean and this much from the land. Why? Because the leaves of the trees and plants have like an armature. The chlorophyll has to be contained within it, and the plant has to spend energy maintaining it. But because they do that, they produce all the other ecosystem services, that is the cleaning of the water, the creation of cloud condensation nuclei, etc. This is relative importance. I just wanted to show you how it works on the planet. Now, on the planet, if we look at the value of global ecosystem services, it has been estimated to be $125 trillion a year. And this is how they've done it. They've gone and checked the planet and said, this is the value of the ecosystem services around the planet. Well, with having such a value, Can we access it? How do we do this? Now, this is what we have been doing with earth restoration. We do smart contracts. C-PES, here's a life unit in operation. We go to people, plant a tree, but this tree is under a contract called a smart contract. We track down the growth of that plant for 4 years. And with the growth of the plant, we also look at the photosynthetic biomass, and then we know how much average oxygen and average clean water has been produced. All this goes towards creating a new value system and hopefully a new trading system. There's no time to talk about it here, but we'll be glad to talk about it later. Right. And this is how we work, the realization of ecosystem services. Under the model of earth restoration, you pay the farmer for 4 years, 80% of the initial investment to the farmer for looking after the tree, and the record of the photosynthetic biomass is sent back, which is evaluated every year, and to find out how much oxygen and clean water has been created by these units. And these units are then also put into an analog forestry design to ensure that there's an increase in biodiversity in application. This is just a quick description of the model I showed you. Now, I'll leave you with an idea that the current leaves today, and leaves now, I hope you understand, are the most important and most valuable thing on this planet, on land, to keep us alive and to keep the ecosystem stable. But the leaves currently provide a surface area about 4 times 3 the total land area of the planet. So you take the land area, it's 4 times, almost 5 times the land area of the planet is the layers of leaves. This is the life support system of the planet, and they are being lost, all of you know, at a huge, huge rate. And the horror, the kicker is this: if you look at the earth, the good land, the good soil we have to support plants and trees are that much. Less than 8% of the surface area of the planet has the potential of living soils to support these plants and leaves. So unless we place a value on this ecosystem, we've had it. And one of the ways that we have found to place a value on ecosystem services is to look at PES and the system that we are developing. And we think that unless we place a value on ecosystem services in every aspect we can, we will be in a much, much more dangerous place with climate change for humanity to deal with. Thank you very much.